Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here, pastor, teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. This is Pastor's Point of View number 390. This is being released January the 9th, 2026, making this the second podcast, if you will, of from Pastor's Point of View in the new year. And we have a prophecy update for you today. Here are the three major categories that we're going to look at in this episode. I want to bring you up to speed a little bit on the Gog-Magog alignment. Also, the Eurocentric New World Order. And then we've got some more current events to share with you concerning Babylon. So with all of that being said, let's jump right in, take a look at our first category, which is the Gog-Magog issue. We know from Ezekiel 38 and 39, and you can see it from this map, that portrays the prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39. There's coming in an attack, yet future, against the nation of Israel from all of those countries, spearheaded by Russia, Iran, and Turkey. You'll notice we have Persia or Iran circled because of a news item I'm going to share with you in just a moment. But if you're having some concerns about how we're getting those ancient biblical sounding ancient names in Ezekiel 38 and 39, why we believe those correlate with modern day nations. Of course, in a short podcast like this, I don't have time to give you all of the documentation, but you can find it in my book, The Middle East Meltdown. I think we have a screenshot of it. The Middle East Meltdown, The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel. So with all of that being said, let me jump in and deal with this first news article from the New York Post. Remember, Iran in Ezekiel's prophecy is Persia. That's actually the easiest one on that map that I showed you earlier in terms of identification, because Persia goes back to biblical times. I mean, much of the biblical story, the story of Esther, some of the story of Daniel, etc., Ezra, Nehemiah, took place in the days of Persia. And Persia just continued on as a modern-day country. It was actually the Persians that allowed Judah to return to their homeland from Babylon after the 70-year captivity. And Persia continues on as a modern-day country, and Persia's name was changed to Iran in 1935. And then, of course, that country, the character of the country was changed to the Islamic Republic of Iran with the revolution, the coup that took place in Iran in 1979, deposing the Shah and replacing the Shah with the Ayatollah in the days of Jimmy Carter, the late 1970s. So of all of the nations on Ezekiel's list in terms of invading, Iran or Persia is the easiest to identify. Ezekiel saw 2,600 years ago that Persia would turn on the West, would turn on Israel, and would invade Israel in the last days, which probably to Ezekiel seemed like a crazy prophecy, since Persia was one of the good guys that allowed the Jews to return to their homeland after the Babylonian captivity of 70 years. And up until 1979, Persia turning on Israel, that didn't make sense because Persia or Iran was an ally of the West and one of the first nations to recognize the newborn state of Israel. And so everything, of course, shifted in 1979 when Iran became a Shiite Islamic theocracy with an ambition and a motive now to invade Israel. So if you give history enough time, it eventually catches up to the scenario that God predicts in his word. So a lot of people are questioning, whether Iran can be a player that will invade Israel, because after all, didn't we just have some very successful airstrikes taking out Iran's nuclear capabilities? spearheaded by Israel and the Trump administration. I mean, wasn't there some great military victory that set Iran back on her heels for decades? I mean, that's what we've been led to believe. And from a patriot perspective, that's what we all want to happen. But Iran is not going to just disappear. She can't, because God's word predicts otherwise. And Iran is making an attempt at a comeback. And that's the subject of this news article that you see there on the screen from the New York Post, dated December 27th, 2025. It says Iran declares total war. Against who? Against the U.S., against Israel, that's Ezekiel 38 and 39, and Europe, as the Islamic Republic seeks to expand nuclear capabilities. I thought those capabilities were dismantled. Well, we're learning otherwise. So here's what the article says. It says Iran's president declared his nation was in a total war with the U.S. Notice that expression, total war. And Israel and Europe, just as Tehran looks to rebuild its nuclear capabilities and strengthen ties with Hamas. Let's see if I can pronounce his name. Masoud Pezeshkian, I think is how you say that, made the bold statement in an interview published in state media Saturday, Barron's reported. And here's what the leadership of Iran said. In my opinion, we are at a total war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. They want to bring our country to its knees, the leader said. This war is worse than the one launched against us by Iraq. On closer inspection, it's far more complex and difficult, he said, in reference to the 1988 war with Iran's western neighbor. The claims come amid UN sanctions on Iran orchestrated by France, Britain, and Germany due to the regime's continued pursuit of nuclear weapons. It also follows the 12-day war with Israel in June, when the Jewish state obliterated much of the Islamic Republic's nuclear capabilities, with the assistance of devastating airstrikes. As tensions between Middle Eastern rivals ramp up, a Tehran-backed candidate is also likely to win a major election to a leading role with Hamas. And it mentions this name, this Palestinian politician, Al-Hayya, is expected to beat Hamas chief, last name Mashal, in an election for head of the group's political bureau, which could be decided in the coming days, sources told Saudi Arabian outlet Ash-Sharq. Al-Hayya is considered close to Iran, according to those same sources, who told the outlet he would have a clearly adversarial stance towards Israel as a tenuous Gaza peace deal hangs in the balance. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is planning to travel Monday to Mar-a-Lago, and he was actually there over the general time period after Christmas, when this recording is being made, looking in our review mirror to events last week, where he is expected to pitch to President Trump a plan, listen to this, to launch new strikes against Tehran. I mean, why would you launch new strikes against Tehran if the last strikes were so successful? Would be my question. Continuing with the article, Israeli sources claim the Islamic Republic is repairing its air defense systems and rebuilding its ballistic missile program, both of which were destroyed by airstrikes during the war, according to an NBC report. The Florida powwow, speaking of Netanyahu meeting with Trump in Mar-a-Lago, also is believed to be crucial to the Gaza deal, with the top White House aides believing Netanyahu is sabotaging the peace framework, Axios reported. It's felt for some time like the Israelis have buyer's remorse, an anonymous White House official told the outlet. Implementing the Gaza deal is hard enough, but the Israelis sometimes do things that make it even harder. That's a comment coming from the upper echelons of the White House of the Trump administration. The article concludes as follows: Netanyahu remains skeptical of the plan to demilitarize Gaza, anonymous Israeli officials told Axios. So in spite of the so-called successful Trump strikes, which from a political level I thought were great and I supported, it looks like Iran is not disappearing quietly into the night. They, number one, have declared total war on the United States and Israel. That's Ezekiel 38 and 39, the one setting the stage for the one day soon, in a certain sense, imminent invasion by those nations into the land of Israel. Number two, it indicates that Iran is about to achieve upper echelon status with one of its politicians in Hamas. And number three, here is Netanyahu going right back to our president and saying we need to do round two. And so that, again, contributes to the theme of tension between Persia and the nation of Israel in the last days, something that God said would exist, something that has to come into fruition as a stage setter in preparation for this this fulfillment of this prophesied Gog and Magog war spoken of in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Now, speaking of Gog-Magog, notice, if you will, this prediction that Ezekiel made as well in Ezekiel 38 and verse 12. It gives the motive of these attackers. Why are they going to attack Israel in the last days? The Bible spells it out very clearly 2,600 years ago. To capture spoil, to seize plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places which are now inhabited, and against the people who are gathered from the nations, who have acquired cattle and goods, who live at the center of the world. And verse 12 is followed by verse 13. Let's take a look at that. And it says there, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all of its villages will say to you, that's the invaders, have you come to capture spoil? Have you assembled your company to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold and great spoil? So you'll notice this language: silver, gold, great spoil, plunder, cattle, and goods. So we know what's causing this invasion. Ultimately, it's the devil, because thoughts will come into the mind of the invaders. Now is the time to invade Israel, and we know who it is that puts thoughts into the minds of fallen men. It would be the devil himself. Peter had some thoughts one day over in Matthew 16, up at a place called Caesarea Philippi, the northern area there of the nation of Israel. Essentially what Peter said is, Lord, I'm going to try to talk you out from dying on the cross. And Jesus turned and said to him, this is all in Matthew 16, verses 21 through 23, get behind me, Satan. You know, you do not have in mind the interests of God, but the interests of man. And so Satan has this ability to put thoughts into the minds of people, actually getting to believe it's their thoughts. And that's why this Gog-Magog invasion happens. We see from early Ezekiel 38, really around verse 1, verse 2, right in that vicinity, that thoughts will come into the mind of these invaders. It's ultimately satanically motivated. Satan understanding that he can stop the coming of the kingdom by blotting out the instrument through which the kingdom will come, which is the nation of Israel. But the prophecies go on and they give the humanistic side, the human side of the invasion. I mean, these invaders, when they invade, they don't think they're accomplishing Satan's will. Satan is too clever for that. They think they're accomplishing this invasion for material gain. They're specifically going after silver, gold, spoil, cattle, and goods. Now, let's think about this just for a minute, if we could. As a stage setter for the fulfillment of this prophecy, Israel must not only be back in their land in unbelief, but she must be becoming increasingly wealthy at the same time. You can't invade a wealthy Israel unless Israel has wealth. And you notice this quote from Mark Twain, who visited that part of the world in 1867, wrote about it 2 years later in his book Innocents Abroad in 1869, and he did not just see a wealthy people group living there. He says, a desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse, a desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the whole route. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of worthless soil, had almost deserted the country. That was the state of that part of the world in 1867. By the way, that is a quote that you will never see on MSNBC, CNN, and you may not even see it on Fox News. And the reason you'll never see that quote is the media elite wants you to believe that the Israelis displaced a thriving population when the nation of Israel was reborn in 1948, and therefore they need to give back the land, some of it, part of it. The ultimate agenda is to get them to give it all back. It's what Helen Thomas said off script. You know who Helen Thomas was. She's now deceased. But she was a longtime White House reporter, White House correspondent going back to the Kennedy years. And she was caught on camera talking about the Jews. And basically what she said is they need to get the H-E double toothpick, so to speak, get the H out of Palestine. And the guy that was filming this says, well, where are they supposed to go? She says, back where they came from. You know, go back to Poland or wherever. So what she is saying is the Jews, Israel has no right to be in that land at all. And that's really the ambition of the world community. And so that narrative works if you get the world to believe that Israel displaced a thriving population there, known as the Palestinians. And the Mark Twain quote refutes that. The other reason that Mark Twain quote is so important is it shows us that there was no nation, there was no wealth in the nation of Israel, which would become the modern state of Israel as late as 1867. But look at Israel today. Here's a graphic or a chart that we frequently use showing Israel's gross domestic product. I've got at the top of the screen why, question mark. And what I'm trying to explain there is why these invaders are going to invade the land of Israel. Look at Israel's gross domestic product today, or as of 2021. Of course, those numbers can be adjusted upward now that we're in 2026. But Israel has a gross domestic product that outstrips that of her neighbors. And her neighbors are insanely jealous of her because of that. And this fits Bible prophecy. It fits wealth returning to the land of Israel in preparation for the motivation, because the motivation for the attack is to capture Israel's wealth. So Israel is being persecuted and surrounded by all sides. And as that is happening, as Israel has been regathered in unbelief and the nations of the world are opposing her, she's becoming wealthy in the process. That's why I found this recent article from the Geller Report very, very insightful. The title of it is The Historic BDS Collapse. And you know what BDS is. It stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. The nations of the earth, even some Protestant denominations within Christendom boycotting the nation of Israel under this very strange, skewed perverted idea that Israel is somehow an apartheid state, which of course is silly. The non-Israeli Arabic population has grown in Israel considerably since 1948. And then you have non-Israelis that can ascend to the highest levels of the Israeli government, the Knesset, the Supreme Court, etc. Israel has no problem with non-Israelis within their borders. You just have to acknowledge that you're in Israel not to destroy Israel, but you're in Israel to, support, further perpetuate Israel. You don't have to be Jewish or Hebrew to have that privilege, and that's not how an apartheid state functions. It's like people calling the United States of America some kind of apartheid state when this country elected a black president, Barack Hussein Obama, not once but twice. I mean, that's pretty strange behavior for an apartheid country. So that's why they do this BDS against Israel. They're trying to argue that Israel's no different than South Africa, that is an apartheid state or was an apartheid state, and therefore we need to boycott, divest, and be involved in sanctions against South Africa. We need to do the same thing to Israel, comparing Israel and South Africa as if they were one and the same, which obviously they are not. And what this article is pointing out is how the BDS movement has completely and totally failed. It's flopped, and Israel, in spite of it, is becoming wealthy. The headline says, historic BDS collapse. Netanyahu seals a $34.7 billion with a B gas deal with Egypt as Israel racks up major economic wins. This is a December 18th article. So here's what it says, just very quickly here. It says, despite Israel being in a constant state of war and Jew hatred reaching heights unseen since the end of World War II, and unrelenting demands to boycott Israel, Israel is scoring massive economic wins. Israel just announced the following. Are you ready? A record $34.7 billion gas deal with Egypt. Israel secures a record $6.7 billion defense export to Germany. NVIDIA, if I'm pronouncing that right, declares Israel its second home with record-breaking campus investment. Rising Israeli exports approach pre-war peak. The economy ministry predicts $160 billion with a B. Israel Tech exits reach $70 billion in a landmark year. Israel ranks the third best economy in the whole world. The shekel the Israeli currency hits a new 3-year and strongest when compared to the United States dollar. The Israeli-Indian renewed free trade agreement talks a match made in heaven. And the last one on this list is Israel joins U.S.-led Pax Silica initiative to cooperate on securing AI supply chains. And I bring this to your attention because exactly what God said in the last days is happening before our very eyes. Number one, the Jews would return to their land in unbelief in preparation for the tribulation period. Number two, as this is happening, the whole world, and we covered a lot of this on our prior broadcast, but the whole world would turn against Israel. And number three, in spite of it all, in spite of all of the hatred, the venom, the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, etc., Israel, in the midst of it, would become exceedingly wealthy, much to the covetousness and the jealousy of her neighbors that will eventually invade her in the last days, according to Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so we are living in a time period where the prophecies of God's ancient word are jumping right off the page into prophetic fulfillment in terms of stage setting. And I would just have to say that the biblical scenario predicted by the prophets right now as I speak at the beginning of 2026 is more credible and more realizable than it's ever been. And of course, we had this terrible shooting, Bondi Beach, Sydney, Australia, first day of Hanukkah. And notice this screenshot here. This I found very, very interesting. It says, Israeli foreign minister urges the Jews to come home after Bondi Beach massacre. Now, why is that interesting to me? It's interesting to me because the prophet Zechariah in chapter 8, verses 7 and 8, we don't have a screenshot on this, but you can look this up in your Bible and you'll see that this is true. When it predicts that the Jews would be regathered into their homeland, it says they're going to come from the east. And I understand why they would come from the east. Those are predominantly communist and Islamic countries that persecute Israel. But Zechariah goes on and he says that they will come from the west. And I've often wondered how and why the Jews would leave the West where they're generally comfortable and go back to Israel to seek refuge. Why would they ever do that? I mean, after all, they've had a great upward mobility, non-persecution here in the United States of America. Why leave America and go back to Israel? Why leave Australia and go back to Israel? Well, you're starting to see an explanation for that, perhaps for the very first time. Anti-Semitism in Western countries is increasing and becoming dominant in the West, just like it is dominant in the East. Now, this wasn't the case maybe 5-10 years ago, but it sure is the case now. As Jewish people, their target practice for thugs and Islamic operatives the first day of Hanukkah in Australia. And here this foreign minister recognizes that and says anti-Semitism is increasing in Australia. It's time for the Jews to get out and come home to the land of Israel where you'll be safe and secure and protected. And that is the coming of the Jews back from the West, in addition to the East, just like Bible prophecy demands. And why wouldn't the world would ever leave New York City? I mean, how many Jews, I don't have the exact number, live in New York City and have prospered in New York City? Why in the world would they leave New York City? Well, now you're starting to see an explanation as to why they would leave New York City and head back home to the land of Israel. The simple reason is because they just elected a jihadi as the mayor, a 12er. A guy who doesn't even believe that the modern state of Israel should exist, a Marxist who wants to confiscate the grocery stores, etc., wants to pay back white neighborhoods, whatever that means, redistribute the wealth, and he wants to move into all of these Marxist experiments that have failed all over the world, and he's an anti-Semite, a 12er, somebody who is a Shiite Muslim, in addition to everything else that I've said. So how can a Jewish person survive and thrive in New York City with that kind of leadership? And so now you're seeing an explanation why they would leave from the West in addition to the East and go home. So my point is God has a purpose and a plan. And it may be that he is allowing this type of anti-Semitism to exist in Western countries where it typically didn't exist as much before, to fulfill his ancient word that the Jews will return from the East and from the West. So that's a little bit on Gog-Magog. Let me jump and switch subjects on this with you if I could. Let's talk very briefly about the Eurocentric New World Order. Notice, if you will, Daniel chapter 7. And notice, if you will, verse 23. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 23, it says, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. So tread down, crush, devour, that's tyranny. And when it envelops the whole earth, that's one world tyranny. It's one of the most specific, clear passages in God's word that really we have anywhere in Holy Writ, for that matter, in which the final form of Gentile rule that will exist just before the second advent of Jesus Christ will be a one-world tyrannical government. And notice this particular picture with the statue that Nebuchadnezzar and later Daniel in the same chapter saw in visions and dreams. And the empire that we're talking about that will envelop the earth just before Jesus comes back is the feet, 10 toes mixed with iron and clay. And you'll notice that the feet are connected to the legs. So if you interpret this dream correctly, we know that the legs represents ancient Rome, a totalitarian government. The eastern-western divisions of ancient Rome, most likely. The feet, yet future, coming right out of the legs, indicates that this final form of one-world tyranny will arise out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome and will eventually envelop the whole earth and probably divide the earth into 10 regions. That is the likely explanation for the 10 toes, later called the 10 horns in Daniel chapter 7. And so we know a lot about this empire of the Antichrist that's coming. It will be global. It will be tyrannical. It will eventually envelop the entire earth, but because the feet are connected to the legs, it will initially arise out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. And so Europe itself, even as I speak, is becoming more and more tyrannical. Now that doesn't surprise me because it would fit the pattern of the prophecies that we're speaking of here. With that being said, notice this particular article from the Western Journal. This one dated December the 24th, 2025. It says, shock and awe. A fiery Rubio imposes unprecedented sanctions on European elites who attempt to censor Americans. Notice what this particular article says. It says, in an unprecedented move, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has announced that restrictions will be imposed on European politicians who have declared themselves enemies of freedom of speech. On Monday, the State Department announced via news release that it's taking action against 5 individuals who have led organized efforts to coerce American platforms to censor, demonetize, and suppress American viewpoints they oppose. These radical activists and weaponized NGOs have advanced censorship crackdown by foreign states, in each case targeting American speakers and American companies. As such, Rubio speaking, I have determined that their entry, presence, or activities in the United States have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. The release continued in saying these individuals will be barred from entrance, but those already here could be subject to deportation. Based upon these determinations, the department has taken steps to impose visa restrictions on agents of the global censorship industrial complex, who as a result will be generally barred from entering the United States, the release stated. Furthermore, based on the foreign policy determination, the Department of Homeland Security can initiate removal proceedings against certain individuals pursuant to, and it names the law, which renders such individuals deportable. Rubio posted to social media platform X about the decision the same day. For too long, ideologues in Europe, he says, Europe, have led organized efforts to coerce American platforms to punish American viewpoints they oppose. The Trump administration will no longer tolerate these egregious acts of extraterritorial extraterritorial censorship, he said. Today, the State Department will take steps to bar leading figures of the global censorship industrial complex from entering the United States. We stand ready and willing to expand this list if others do not reverse course. Here's how the article concludes. European bureaucrats thousands of miles away had hoped to collude with tech companies using cyberspace as their medium to stifle Americans' rights. So what this article is dealing with is how Europe tried to use tech tyranny, as I call it, to penalize, censor, impinge, inhibit the viewpoint of Americans using these different platforms. And to Marco Rubio and the Trump administration's credit, they said, enough is enough. If you're going to do that kind of thing, you can't come into the United States of America. And if we find you in the United States of America, you European elites that tried to do this, we're going to deport you. This is an example where the Trump administration is sort of acting as a restraint, if you will, on the progress of the New World Order. But the fact that these European elites were doing this shows you growing tyranny within Europe, exactly as Bible prophecy anticipates concerning the end of the age. So with that being said, we have a short video we want to play for you. This is European Union President Ursula von der Leyen, I think is how you say her name. And she's talking about something where it's called pre-bunking as opposed to debunking. And essentially what it comes down to is censorship and their antagonism towards the whole concept of free speech there in Europe. And so let's play that, and then it lasts about a minute, and I'll come back and make some comments.
And finally, it takes results. As technology evolves, we need to build up societal immunity around information manipulation. Because research has shown that pre-bunking is much more successful than debunking. Pre-bunking is basically the opposite of debunking. In short, prevention is preferable to cure. Perhaps if you think of information manipulation as virus, instead of treating an infection once it has taken hold, that is debunking. It is much better to vaccinate so that the body is inoculated. Pre-bunking is the same approach. Because disinformation relies on people passing it on to us. It is essential that people know what malign information's influence is and what the techniques are that are behind it. And as the knowledge goes up, our chances of being influenced goes down. And that builds up a society with resilience that we will need.
So this is something that she says that she calls pre-bunking instead of debunking. And she draws this very interesting analogy to the world of medicine. And she talks about a vaccine, I guess in this case, a vaccine properly used and properly administered, and how it can prevent, eventual diseases and things like that from having too much influence in the human body. So she's talking about an ounce of prevention, is worth a pound of cure. I think I've got that saying right. A little bit of prevention is what I meant to say is worth a lot more than a big expense related to cure. And then she says, by way of analogy, we have this pre-bunking, debunking. Rather than debunking speech that they disagree with, let's just prevent it from getting out in the first place. And it just shows you a mindset and a mentality that she has where she just doesn't believe in free speech. And interestingly enough, she says we have the technology now to pull this off. And so this is the direction that Europe is headed in. I mean, they look at removing one's right to speak they analogize it to preventative maintenance in the body. And so, when you go back to the UK, et cetera, this is where the Magna Carta came from, which is a great advance in human freedom from government tyranny. This is where parliamentarian democracy arose from, and it's in that very part of the world that these elites now think, these are the people that Marco Rubio, to his credit, is trying to prevent from entering the United States of America. But it's these European elites that just have no concept of free speech whatsoever, and they believe in complete and total government censorship. And this is the Europe of today. This is where their heads are at. This is their mindset. This is their mentality. And boy, it sure fits, does it not, with those feet being connected to those legs of iron, the coming one world tyranny of the Antichrist. Here is a similar video that we'll show for you. This is the president of the European Central Bank. Her name is Christine Lagarde, I believe, and she's talking about a digital euro, a pilot program that they're on the precipice of launching it. And she makes this little speech here in front of a Christmas tree. I think this was made late December of last year. And it shows you what's coming in the new year for Europe. And let's go ahead and roll that at this time.
Been a lot of work. One thing that the European Central Bank is proud of is to have achieved our target of 2% medium term. Inflation is down to where we wanted it to be. We've also looked at our strategy going forward, and we took stock of the work done by all the teams to see from a strategy point of view how we're going to go forward and whether our strategy is fit for purpose and whether the ECB is fit for the times we're going through. Difficult times they are. The two other big projects that we have worked on and will continue to work on in 26 are number one, the digital euro. We have completed the cycle of the preparation. The Governing Council has given its go-ahead to move to the next cycle, and we're now waiting for the European Parliament to come up with final legislation that will the go-ahead for the pilot phase and then the launch. The other project, which is not unrelated, more traditional, but still very efficient and needed, is the banknote. We are revamping our banknotes. Process is well underway, and we will have new design, new faces possibly, and we look forward to that as well. So to all of you, you should know that the European Central Bank is standing strong, pleased that it has reached its price stability target, and determined to make sure that this remains the case and that we are useful for us.
So what is she talking about? Economic streamlining, changes they want to make with banknotes. And really what she's talking about is moving into a cashless society, which of course is preparatory for a social credit score system. Once all of our transactions become digitized, then the government can keep a record of us concerning our buying behavior. And if we happen to be doing things, watching things, attending churches, reading literature that we purchase outside of the government narrative, then they have the ability to electronically cripple our opportunities in life that come from things like bank loans, traveling privileges, passport privileges, putting your kids in the better schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this digital currency, which I think will start in Europe and eventually be rolled out into the entire world, is being streamlined there in Europe as we speak, as she speaks very openly about a digital euro, a pilot program, and an imminent launch. And on this subject of the New World Order, notice this screenshot. I believe this is from X, and it says, breaking, the United States is, not the United States, the United Nations is officially calling to isolate the United States. And this comes from a United Nations insider, and she's the UN Special Rapporteur, I guess is how you say that, Francisca Albanese, and this is her statement. She says, quote, we'll stay calm. We will stay calm. I'm trying to read this without the contractions in there. We will stay calm. We will not panic. We will remember that the international community is made up of 193 states. And this is the time to give the U.S. what it's been looking for, isolation, close quote. And what she's complaining about is the Trump administration. Trump is not playing ball with the globalists the way the Bushes did, the way Obama did, the way Clinton did, the way Biden did. He wants America to become great again. And he looks at many of these types of decisions from a nationalistic framework, right down to the borders issue. He wouldn't sign on, got us out of the Paris Climate Accord, got us away from the United Nations Health Treaty. And these really aren't treaties. They're kind of executive agreements. They're really treaties, I should say, masquerading as executive agreements. And they have to articulate them that way so presidents at will can put us into them. Because if you call them a treaty, then according to our own Constitution, I think it's Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, if memory serves, if the executive branch puts us into a treaty, then that requires a 2/3 supermajority vote from the senators there present. And so they get around these things by just saying these really aren't treaties. They're accords or agreements. But the fact of the matter is Trump is moving us away from those globalist treaties because he sees them as the anti-American ripoff that they are. And now the New World Order in the midst of all of that is saying we're not going anywhere. We're just going to wait out the Trump administration. Trump is not going to be in the White House forever. They said this same thing at the climate summit a couple of months ago back in Brazil, I think it was. And they just kept passing tighter and tighter regulations, which they can get away with because America is not there in the talks anymore. And when the next progressive or liberal president gets into power, whether it be another Obama, Hillary Clinton, another Biden type person, then they're just going to, because these aren't treaties, we're not calling them treaties, jam us back into this globalist framework. And it'll be worse than ever because the restrictions during America's absence have tightened. So this is the attitude of the globalists towards a nationalistic Donald Trump. He's not going to be there forever. We'll wait him out. We'll isolate America for the time being. After all, America is just one nation, and we're 193 nations. And of course, the whole thing is ludicrous because we very sadly pay for 40% of the United Nations budget, roughly, and they meet in our country in New York City. What the Trump administration really needs to do is kick them out of the country completely, and we need to completely defund. Everybody wants to defund the police. Well, we need to defund the United Nations because it's a globalist entity that pursues globalist goals, many of which are not in accord with what our nation believes in or stands for and aren't in the best interests of the United States of America. The United Nations hates America. I mean, you saw that kind of act out a little bit when Trump, to make a speech there a couple of months ago, got on the escalator and suddenly, magically, the escalator wasn't working the moment he and Melania stepped on the escalator. And then he got up to make his speech and look at this, lo and behold, the microphone's not working. I mean, do you think those things are accidental? Do you think they're random? Do you think they're coincidental? No, these are intimidation tactics. The United Nations trying to tell Trump who they think is really in charge. We're in charge. And even though you think you're in charge, you're not going to be there forever, and we'll isolate you in the meantime. and there's 193 of us and one of you. So all of these things that I've been discussing here are prophetically significant because they show us this fourth beast emerging that Daniel spoke of that will be global and will involve itself in totalitarianism as well. Let's move to our final area here that we want to look at, the issue of Babylon. And we have a few slides on this. Notice Revelation chapter 17, and notice, if you will, verse 18. It says, "The woman you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth." I've given you many times this quote from E.W. Bullinger in his Revelation commentary. He writes concerning this verse, God says it's a city. I believe we have a screenshot of this. God says it's a city. He does not say a system or a religion, but a city. So what Revelation 17 and 18 predicts is a city that's coming. That's who the harlot is. And this city, it looks like, is going to be the headquarters of the Antichrist. This city has a name. It's Babylon the Great. The name Babylon is used 5 times in the book of Revelation. It always means the literal city of Babylon. Babylon, the name Babylon is used about 300 times throughout the Bible. It always means the literal city of Babylon. There's a map of where it will appear. In between the Euphrates and the Tigris River on the banks of the Euphrates in modern-day Iraq, which is the exact location where the Tower of Babel was built, Genesis 11, verse 2, and it's the exact location where the children of Israel were taken into the 70-year captivity, Daniel chapter 1, verse 2. I am one of those that don't spiritualize or symbolize or allegorize this language away. I believe Babylon means Babylon. If you want the documentation on it, I have a book out on the subject called Babylon, the Bookends of Prophetic History, which seeks to answer the arguments textually raised by the non-literalists. So all the arguments that you hear, Revelation is a symbolic book, this can't be literal, what about the 7 hills? Doesn't Peter refer to Babylon as a symbol in 1 Peter 5, verse 13? You name it. All of those arguments are answered in that book, which I can't do on a short podcast like this. So I would encourage you to get the book if you're interested. And one of the things that's setting the stage for this is, notice this map here. This is a map of something that we frequently mention. This is called the Al-Fah Port map, which will connect Turkey with the Persian Gulf by way of dry canals, wet canals, and waterways, which will allow businesses to chop off great lengths and distances from their trips as they're sending goods or receiving goods. And the area, as this is being built, is going to travel very near Baghdad being about 58 miles south of Babylon. And so you can see how something like this is going to return Babylon to the maritime economic powerhouse that the Bible indicates she will be in Revelation chapter 18. Because when you talk this way, and I deal with this in the book, people say, no, modern day Babylon can't be what is spoken of in Revelation 17 and 18 because it's landlocked. It's not a port city, and it's not an economic powerhouse. Well, the Al-Fah Port system is about to render all of those arguments null and void as God throughout the world in all of these different signs is aggressively setting the stage for his end time scenario. And everything God says has to happen because God cannot lie. But notice this first article here dealing with a little progress in that system. Not a little progress, a lot of progress. It says Basra's sky illuminates over Al-Fah waters in celebration of the completion of the GCPI immersed tunnel installation. The article says the General Company for Ports of Iraq celebrated today, Saturday, December 20th, 2025, the completion of the installation of all segments of the immersed tunnel within the Al-Fah Grand Port project. This milestone marks the conclusion of one of the country's most prominent strategic engineering endeavors and the first tunnel of its kind in the Middle East. A formal and public ceremony was held at the project site in Basra Governorate, attended by officials, engineers, journalists, and citizens. The event included a field tour inside the tunnel following the installation of all of its concrete segments, as well as firework displays enjoyed by the city's residents. The article concludes this way: GCPI immersed tunnel forms an essential component of the Al-Fah Grand Port system, one of Iraq's largest strategic projects. It is expected to facilitate transportation flows and reinforce the country's position on the regional and international trade map. Isn't that what Revelation 18 predicts? Once it enters service in the subsequent phases of the project. One more article on this, if I may. This one is a December 13th, 2025 article. It says Iraq Port welcomes the launch of a direct international maritime line between the United Arab Emirates Rashid Port and the Qasr Port, paving the way for the success of the Al-Fah Grand Port after its opening. The article says the General Company for Ports of Iraq announced the launch of a direct maritime transport service between the United Arab Emirates and the Qasr Port. The article says, in its statement, the company affirmed that the new service represents an important addition to the capabilities of Iraq's ports in handling roll-on, roll-off, otherwise known as ro-ro vehicles, and expanding fast maritime transport options. It added that the line will help reduce reliance on land transport, accelerate cargo delivery, and provide the solutions for transporting accompanied travel trailers. The company further noted that it is working to prepare the operation requirements of the port to ensure smooth service delivery, pointing out that the new line will support bilateral trade between Iraq and the United Arab Emirates, enhance the efficiency of regional supply chains, and strengthen the competitiveness of Iraqi ports. The statement also highlighted that the growing demand for the direct trailer transport services reflects the Iraqi market's need for faster and more reliable routes, noting that the launch of this line aligns with a broader orientation towards adopting sustainable logistic options that contribute to reducing carbon emissions compared to traditional transport modes. The company concluded by affirming that the General Company for Ports of Iraq will continue to develop its infrastructure and strengthen its regional partnerships to ensure the provision of modern maritime services that meet rising demand and reinforce Iraq's ability to play a pivotal role in regional and international trade, close quote. Bottom line, Iraq, city of Babylon, is becoming a maritime city, just like the Bible predicts. Number two, she is becoming a regional and ultimately global trade powerhouse, exactly like the book of Revelation, specifically chapter 18, predicts. And so these arguments that people have used for a long time, there's nothing going on in Babylon. Babylon doesn't have any economic power. Babylon is landlocked. All of these sorts of arguments are being eviscerated as we speak. And the Al-Fah Port system is hastening the way into the end times. Well, that's all we have for today. And here are the three areas we looked at today. We brought you up to speed on some issues in Iran related to the Gog-Magog invasion, the Eurocentric New World Order and its hatred for the free expression of ideas, which is growing, and then a few comments we made on the further development of the literal city of Babylon, just a few infomercials by way of closing. And even before we get to those, we want to end with a note of hope. Titus 2:13 says, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus. Do you know Jesus personally? If you know him personally, then you're tied into his promises, and here's one of them. Before God's judgment hits planet Earth in the 7-year tribulation period, he will take his church to heaven. And you can know Jesus personally now, even as I am speaking, by accepting something that he did for you 2,000 years ago. Through his death, burial, and resurrection, he fixed the sin problem, which separates us from God. And his final words on the cross were, "It is finished." Translation of the Greek word tetelestai, which means paid in full. And you can be dialed in to that arrangement, that transaction, simply by placing your personal trust or faith into the God-man Jesus Christ and what he did for you. And I hope many people within the sound of my voice are doing that, even as I speak. Concerning the infomercials, invite you to get Pastor's Point of View in podcast format, wherever you get your podcasts. Put Andy Woods Ministries into the search engine and enjoy Pastor's Point of View in podcast format. Go to the App Store, type in Andy Woods Ministries, download our free app, and get our content that way. Go to our website to get our content, andywoodsministries.org. While you're there, sign up for our free newsletter, which you can receive in your inbox every Friday morning. And while you're on our app and our website, take a look at the Ask Andy search engine AI device and type in your question, your Bible question. It'll search my sermon archives and give you an answer, all for free. And if you're interested in seminary training, check out the school that I'm the president of, chafer.edu. And as you look at this screenshot here, you can see that what our spring course offerings look like, and you have until the 21st of January to sign up for a course. And while you're investigating Chafer on our website, download a free copy of our journal entitled Pneumatikos. Here's the latest issue, hot off the press. And we're looking forward to the Sugarland Bible Church ProfCon coming right up February 20th and 21st. Go to profcon.com to learn more about it. There you can see the list of our speakers. It's an all-day Friday event, February 20th, and a banquet that evening. And an all-day Saturday event, the 21st. And it's a Last Days Discernment Prophecy Conference. This will be our 5th annual prophecy conference at Sugarland Bible Church. To accommodate a larger group of people, we moved it off campus to the Marriott City Walk. And stick around on the 22nd Sunday as our presenters in the conference will be presenting during our normal Sunday school and church service times at Sugarland Bible Church. Not long after that will be the Chafer Theological Seminary Pastors Conference, March 2nd through 4th. There's a screenshot where you can learn about that conference focusing on spiritual warfare. Pastor Dennis Roxer being our keynote speaker. And then not long after that, we'll have the Stealing the Mind Conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. That will be March the 14th, 2026, a one-day Saturday event covering key prophetic and worldview issues. And then we have a conference coming up through comingsoonministries.org in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and you can see the speakers that will be involved in that. And beyond that, take a look at our Bible Lands cruise. September 24th through October 10th, really what I've discovered is it's through October 11th. This is a 5-star ship, 9-day cruise, 3 countries, 5 days in Israel. I'll be teaching on the ship and at the various Bible Land sites, along with host Bill Perkins of Compass Ministries, who organized this trip. People have said, wait, it says sold out. Well, not anymore, because we just added a 3rd bus. So sign up now while the opportunity for you is there and available. There's no better way to learn the Bible than to go to the actual places where biblical events unfolded. And then last but not least, my book, The Bible and Your Vote, is out. And I would encourage you to access that, as it will teach you how to vote, not based on party lines, but on biblical truth. So with all of that being said, that's all I have for today for Pastor's Point of View. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing this ministry. Thank you for caring about this ministry. Thank you for giving to this ministry, as you guys so faithfully did in 2026. And Lord willing, 2025, excuse me. And Lord willing, we will see you next time on Pastor's Point of View. God bless you.